Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Samantha Harvey, the author of Orbital and several other novels, which we'll be talking about today, this evening. With Orbital, she won the Booker Prize last year. Samantha Harvey's work is praised for its lyrical prose, psychological depth, and philosophical insight. She is a writer who is deeply engaged with what it means to be alive. Every one of her 5 novels and 1 memoir is a unique literary experiment through which she probes what it means to live thoughtfully and attentively in an uncertain world. In her first novel, The Wilderness, she explores time and memory by portraying a man's gradual descent into Alzheimer's. In All Is Song, she examines how integrity and compassion can come into conflict in both private and public life by telling the story of 2 brothers divided by loyalty and belief. Dear Thief is a confessional letter that becomes a meditation on friendship, betrayal, and forgiveness. The Western Wind is set in a medieval village and unfolds backwards in time to uncover a mysterious death. The Shapeless Unease is her only non-fiction work so far, and it is her haunting account of a year of insomnia. Her most recent work, Orbital, is a meditative novel that takes place over a single day aboard a space station that orbits the Earth several times every single day. Tonight we'll be talking mostly about Orbital, what it means to write about space in a way that feels deeply human. Samantha Harvey, welcome to this year's National Book Festival. We are very honored to have you here. It's been a year since Orbital was announced as the winner of the Booker Prize. How have these 12 months been for you as a novelist? It's not your first award. Was it any different?
Oh yeah, there isn't really any comparison, I think, between anything I've won before or been shortlisted before and the Booker. It's just a different. I mean, publishers care about it for a start. You can win other prizes, and Orbital won a couple of other smaller prizes, which, you know, your publisher says, yeah, great, and then it's gone. You know, no, they don't really pay it any attention. But the Booker, they very much care about. So it's been an incredible year. It's been incredibly busy. I've worked, you know, 7 days a week, most weeks of the year, traveled a lot, but it's been magnificent. I mean, I've got readers that I never had before. I have, you know, just an attention to the work and an engagement from readers with the work that I've not had before. And it's been really a wild ride.
Oh, we can imagine. But have you been writing during
No, no, I haven't written anything. And I did come back from the Christmas break. So the Booker happens in mid-November. So the next person wins on Monday, in fact. So I hand it over. And I was very busy up to Christmas. And then I had the Christmas break. And I thought, when I come back from Christmas, I'm going to make sure I have a day or maybe 2 days a week for writing. And I'm going to just tell my agent that's what I'm doing and clear those days. And I did that. And it lasted for about 3 weeks. And then I just gave up. It's too much it's too much work to do. It's hard to get your head into that, you know, into thinking about another novel when all of your attention is being poured towards this one. So
you can't have too many years of this touring.
Yeah, you can't win the Booker too often, I think. It's not good for your writing.
Make sure not to win it.
Yeah.
For a while. Let's talk a bit about Orbital as a novel. You have often described it as a space pastoral. Can you tell us a bit more about why you call it a space pastoral.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure it's a very good way of describing it, really. I said it once and then it sort of stuck. It made sense to me at the time. I think I wanted this, although it's set in space, it isn't sci-fi. And it's in some ways more like a piece of nature writing, and I wanted it to feel like a piece of nature writing, and that was it's a book that's interested in imagery, and it's quite a painterly novel. You know, it's a lot of mark making and describing images and so on. So I wanted it to be a book that was really attentive to the natural world and to the Earth as we can see it from low Earth orbit. In my case, of course, on YouTube rather than actually going into space. But and the pastoral bit, you know, I wanted to see it as a novel that was looking at the Earth almost, you know, by day, when you look at the Earth from low Earth orbit, it looks like it's uninhabited. At night, you can clearly see it's inhabited because of city lights and so on. But by day, it looks uninhabited. And I wanted to sort of explore that idea of a kind of a pre-industrial Earth, and the way the heart yearns, at least my heart yearns for that, for a time I've never experienced, I guess, of a natural world that is unharmed by humans, and that it is not filled with the sound of with noise and sound of, you know, the combustion engine, you know, and so on. I wanted it to sort of reach back past that and conjure up a sense of connection with the natural world. So that's where the pastoral comes from, but and also recognizing that there is a problematic word, and that is sort of yearning for something that never existed, or yearning for something that's very misunderstood. And I think also the book has a sense of melancholia and of yearning, I think, because that was in me when I was writing it. And that's partly also because I'm writing about a space station which is very much based on the ISS. And the ISS is in its last years, really. It will be deorbited soon. And I think it's been this kind of amazing peace project in many ways. It's brought together a lot of nations that are not natural bedfellows. And so there was that sense of an era passing as well, sort of an era of peaceful cooperation, which is very much ending or ended.
You do make a comment about the difference between the ISS when it started in 2000 and it was collaborative, and it's maybe a symbol of hope and collaboration, whereas the space missions today, or rather the rockets into space, they are more individualistic, competitive, extractive. So that was intentional. You really emphasize that.
Yeah, very much so. In the book, there are the 16 orbits that the space station takes around the Earth in this one day. And then at the same time, very much kind of in the background of the novel, there is a lunar mission happening, which is the next mission, the Artemis 3 mission, which will eventually take.
Yeah, apparently it's been moved forward from 2026 to 27.
Yeah, they keep. It was going to be 25, and then it was 26, and they keep pushing it. But that will land humans on the moon again for the first time in 50 years. And so I have this in the background, and I really wanted to, you know, I could think about it in terms of this sort of circular movement of the ISS, of the space station around the planet, and then this movement away of the lunar mission, which is I think emblematic of this new era that we're entering into, which is one of not attending to the Earth and orbiting the Earth, but getting away from it and getting towards the moon and getting towards Mars and extracting, as you say, their resources.
Yes, in fact, I feel that It is taking place in space, but it's mostly about Earth. And there is this idea that the distance between Earth and the spacecraft is constant. There is this constant element. It's a circular movement, and it keeps it in space. Do you feel do you feel some consolation in the fact that there is this tether that is keeping it from moving away from the earth? Because the earth is a symbol of hope. It's a symbol of it is the mother. It is home. So do you find comfort in this idea of circularity and connection?
Yeah, very much. Yeah, and I think that's the kind of pastoral, again, in a way, like thinking about that in a literal way, where you have the, the shepherd and the minding the flock. And I had this, I mean, probably ridiculously sentimental idea of, the ISS sort of, in some sense, this protective role of shepherding the Earth in some way. There is something in the rhythm of those orbits and the dependent, the the way, the dependability of them, the way that they are, absolutely predictable. It's moving at the same speed all the time. It has to, otherwise it will either its orbit will either decay and it will crash into the earth, or it'll speed away. There's something in that kind of rhythm and the repetition that I find both comforting and also very, from a writing point of view, really generative. Like there's something when you're sort of writing prose that's very repetitive. There's something in that I think I take from lots of different writers, from poetry and from Virginia Woolf, and lots of writing I love, that has this kind of almost lullaby, feeling to it, but then which you disrupt, continually with, with themes and ideas, but using that as your base, that the rhythmic nature of the language.
It's the heart. So you are very much in awe with space. And where does this fascination with space come from? I noticed that in your very first book. So I read Samantha Harvey's novels from the last one and moved backwards to the first one. And in the first few pages of your first novel, there is also the mention of a space mission. So it was a lovely surprise to see that even in your first work, you included a space mission. So I was wondering if, like in Orbital, the astronauts, they speak of the fact that they were always fascinated by space, and they remember what happened that might have triggered their interest in becoming astronauts. You did not become an astronaut, but you became a novelist. But space is there more than once, sort of.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'd forgotten about that mention of it in the wilderness. I think there's something in that novel where I say, that space travel is our way of becoming conscious of ourselves, or something like that. I think that idea has been in my mind for a while. I wouldn't say I'm fascinated by space. I mean, I'm not a space geek by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know a lot about what's happening in space travel and space science. Or, I don't keep on top of it all the time. It's not. I wasn't a child who had pictures of rockets on the wall. Although I do remember, as most people of my generation, very vividly remember the Challenger disaster. And that really impacting on me, because we had done a project on it at school and we were all excited about it. And so many children of, who are now my age, will remember that, quite vividly. So I think, there were certain things there that probably did in some way contribute towards this book happening, but really it wasn't so much an interest in space as an interest in the earth, and wanting to find a way to write about it that was that was new or meaningful to me. And when I started thinking about this book, I thought, well, how strange is it that we don't ever write realism about space? You know, we write sci-fi and we write nonfiction, but fiction, you know, realist fiction set in space isn't really a thing. And why? You know, we live there. You know, there are people living there right now. It's a lived domestic environment, and that seemed, you know, just as a place where human stories unfold and are unfolding every day. It seemed to me curious that that hadn't been done, and a really fascinating invitation to try to do that.
You say that safe is space. Space is safe. How and weightlessness is comforting. That gravity is that which brings problems. When the astronauts are in space, they feel that they don't have to deal with the problems that they will then face once they land. How do you think it's true for astronauts?
Mm. I don't know. I don't know. I think, I mean, there's a short passage in the book where I write about how, you know, in some respects, they're safer in space in that they are more monitored. They don't have anything, there's no gravity, so they don't have anything to fall off or injure themselves on. There isn't disease there. They're all quarantined before they go, and there isn't at least contagious disease. You know, during COVID, the astronauts on the ISS were the only humans who were not kind of susceptible to COVID at that point. So you know, in those ways, it's safer there. Of course, in other ways, they're this far from the vacuum of space and certain death. So it's not. But I did a talk on Monday with an astronaut, in fact, and he picked up on a bit on this sort of theme in the book. And the fact that, you know, when they're in orbit, the things that happen on Earth are almost paused. It's like your life on Earth is almost paused. And this was Tim Peake, the British astronaut, and he felt that resonated with him. He felt that there was something in that. There's one of the astronauts in my book loses her mother while she's in orbit. Her mother dies, and she obviously didn't have a chance to say goodbye to her and can't go to her funeral. And she takes comfort from the fact that while she's in space, it's as if her mother is still there. You know, until she returns to Earth and picks up her life again, it's as if everything is kind of paused. And the astronaut I was speaking to did feel there was something in that idea, but it was, like many of the ideas in Orbital, a bit of a supposition on my part.
You do mention as well the idea of why do we still need to send humans into space when we could send robots? And there's a character who is thinking mostly about this, and robots would not be the answer. And this makes me feel that it's also a very human endeavor to be out there and to witness the greatness of Earth. In fact, I feel that it's not a sci-fi novel, as you say, and space, the fact that it takes place up there, it's because there is the need for this specific altitude of 400 kilometers, which is not too far away, but not too close, for the astronauts and for the readers accompanying them, to be able to see the spectacle of space, of the Earth, that Earth is spread in front of them, and then to contemplate its greatness. Excuse me, which is why it's not a sci-fi novel.
Yeah, I think that probably loops back to what we were, to your question earlier about my interest in space and this idea of us becoming more aware of ourselves or more conscious of ourselves by coming away from the planet and looking back at it, as we do in our own lives by stepping outside of ourselves a little bit and looking in. There's this distance, not a vast distance. The ISS is only 250 miles up. It's not far away, but it's enough of a distance for us to become somewhat conscious of our own kind of collective humanity, which I find very interesting.
Earth becomes like heaven. So there's this inversion of heaven is Earth, actually. And
yeah, and for sure, when you look at the Earth from low Earth orbit or images of it, you think, well, any imagining we have of heaven looks like that. That's every idea we have in our kind of collective consciousness of what is beautiful and what is desirable and what is heavenly, what is paradise, looks like our planet. And I think that's quite a startling thing to realize, because we can lose that perspective when we're on the surface, as we are all the time. We can lose that.
Yeah, and we are destroying it. So you make comments about this, that maybe by putting us up there, finally we can realize that we are sabotaging our own home. We are destroying our own home.
Yeah, for sure. And there is undoubtedly a climate change element to this book, but I didn't want it to feel that I was trying to, point at the planet and say, look, this is how you need to feel about it. It was that in sort of inherent to those images and looking at those images is this sense of we live in a palace, that we live in a resplendent palace. I just wanted to convey those images as best I could with words, because that's what I have. If I had any musical ability, I probably would have written a piece of music instead, but given what I have, I wanted to try to articulate not even the images so much as the way I feel about them, this expansive feeling I have about looking at the Earth from that viewpoint, and just the improbable loveliness of it, and also the inescapable fact that it is all we have, and whatever the reader wants to do with that. What I would like the reader to do with that is to go away and look at those images for themselves, because I think they should be national TV every night. I think that they are, just for their sheer beauty, and their intimacy. The planet is distant, but actually it feels very close, and you get to know it very well when you're watching the footage of those orbits. You're moving around the planet so fast, you feel like it's just the continents are just a series of gardens that are passing by underneath.
Which makes me realize that the main character is the Earth itself. It's not the 6 astronauts and cosmonauts on the space station, but it's the Earth itself as the protagonist. How does it feel to write a novel where the main characters or the main character is not human? This, I'm sure it's you wanted to do that.
Yeah, it's a really good point because we humans are, of course, the kind of preoccupation of almost all novels out there, and Orbital does explore to some degree the interior lives of the 6 astronauts and the relationships between them to a degree, but it doesn't really. It's that's not the scale at which, or the only scale at which it's working at. And it took me a really long time and a lot of drafts to come to understand that. I wrote it. The first draft, in fact, the first 2 drafts were told from the point of view of one of the astronauts in the first person at the beginning. And then when that wasn't working, I changed it to third person, but still in her point of view. And it still wasn't working. And I couldn't understand what was wrong with it, because this is what I always do as a novelist. I always write from one character's point of view. So why wasn't it working? And I think that you'll know, as a writer, it takes you a while, doesn't it, to understand what each book needs. And it doesn't necessarily need the thing that the last book needed, or even the thing that you think you're good at. It needs something else, and you have to meet it on its own terms. And it took me quite a long time to understand what those terms were, and that this book is not at a human scale. It's not only at a human scale. And it is about the earth, but it is also not only about the earth. I wanted to be able to scatter the reader's gaze, I suppose, for it not to be clear what the subject of the novel is, really.
Hence La Menina's,
Hence, yeah.
Velasquez painting.
Yeah.
And that takes us to perception, that it's not clear who is looking at who and what is it that we're looking at. I felt most of the time that I'm there in this really restrictive space on the space station, and I always felt that I'm next to them and we're looking outside, and we're in space, but we're not looking at space, we're looking at the earth.
Yeah.
And like the characters, we can't do anything to stop what's happening. I'm thinking of the typhoon, for example.
Yeah.
That the astronauts are like fortune tellers. They can tell the future. They can see that something is going to happen very soon, but they can only see it as beautiful.
Yeah.
From up there, and they cannot do anything about it, which again sort of derails the idea of the traditional building blocks of what a novel should be, like having characters or plot-wise too. I'm sure you have received different reactions from readers and critics about this, about the way that it's plot-wise. It's not plot-based, it's not plot-bound, and the characters that they don't have agency. What do you feel? How do you feel about this?
Yeah, that's all true. I mean, in some ways, the characters do, of course, have agency because they're astronauts, and they are the most kind of dynamic and capable humans among us in many ways, and they've got there. They've got themselves there. But you're right. In the book, over this one day, they're floating 16 times around the Earth. They're not doing very much. They're doing some experiments, they're doing some cleaning, they watch a film, but you're right, they don't have a great deal of agency. They can't do anything about the typhoon that they're reporting on that's about to hit the Philippines, and they know the damage it will cause. And as you say, there's no plot, there's none. And I think this was all intentional on my part. I was thinking about how, for a start, this is one day on a space station, and on the ISS, most days, almost every day, very little goes wrong. And if you're an astronaut, the very thing you don't want is plot, ever. How they're in this sort of this contained, enclosed environment of a somewhat artificial peace and cooperativeness between the different nations and the different individuals. They have to get on with one another, whether they like one another or not. And they are all doing the thing that they most want to do in the world. So they are people who are happy and doing the thing they love. And I thought that's a kind of radical idea for a novel in some ways. You know, what would it be to write a novel in which nothing really goes wrong, and in which some kind of crisis isn't the driver of drama or momentum? And because so often, you know, plot derives from things going wrong, from conflict and so on. And of course, you know, that's often the case.
With stories about space, there's always catastrophe and
I think the reader is waiting for that. I mean, I've had a few readers who've said to me, you know, I really enjoyed your book once I gave up on the idea that something was going to happen. And once you kind of accept, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. I'm not waiting for that bit in the blurb that's the blah, 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 until, or blah, blah, blah. But
I felt that the typhoon was like a menace. Okay, we're not going to, there's no superhero who will come and resolve this, but I felt that was the element of, obviously it wasn't just a typhoon. I mean, weather conditions are always getting worse. So it's a reminder that things are going to go wrong.
And I think at a sort of a global scale, these big weather events, for example, are going to be the plot of our human story. You know, they are the things that are going to drive and are already driving the most change and the movement of people. And so I think, you know, at that, when you zoom out and you look at that scale, these are those dramatic, you know, drivers of story.
I want to ask a question about time, because time is very often used in your novels, not just as a philosophical concept, but also as a literary device. For example, if we, let's say the Western Wind, it takes place in 4 days, but it goes backwards. The Shapeless Unease is 1 year of insomnia, and in this novel, not only do you use the idea of 1 day, 24 hours, but also it's 24 hours with 16 orbits. So this really, it's really playing with the idea of time. And because not only that, but also the fact that from out there, with the speed of the space station, I think it's over 17,000 kilometers,
miles
per hour. It seems as if the Earth is spinning faster, and I noticed that many of the adjectives like galloping, rushing, there are these adjectives, these words depicting speed. So it's like really seeing the Earth spinning around. So the concept of time, even for the astronauts, they have to keep track of time to anchor the mind. And there's a quotation where it says that space shreds time. So in this novel, we see this interplay of not just playing with time. It's a one-day novel, but
Yeah.
so what was your strategy with this?
I mean, in a way, if you're going to write a novel that's set on a space station that's orbiting the planet 16 times every day, then your time signature is given to you. You and it took me a bizarrely long time to recognize this because the book was originally it took place over 1 month rather than 1 day. And again, it was another piece of the puzzle that I couldn't get right, along with voice and pretty much everything else. And then when I realized, of course, it has to happen over 1 day because that's the whole. That's the point of disruption. We've got the 24-hour clock that the astronauts live by, their own body clocks that are enslaved to that 24-hour rhythm. And meanwhile, they're going around the planet every 90 minutes, and there are 16 sunsets and 16 sunrises every day. There's the time signature for the book. It has to be that, because I found myself writing over and over again about how disrupted time was for the astronauts and how, it's in the middle of their day. They're doing whatever, they're eating their lunch, and down there on Earth, it's the middle of the night, and they're, at 9:30, they're looking at an Earth and it's springtime, and at 10 o'clock, they're looking at the Earth and it's autumn because they're on the other side of it, and they're looking at the Earth and it's today, and then they're looking at the Earth and it's tomorrow, and then they go back round to today again, and they're this exploding of what time means, of what linear time means, and yet they're having to live by linear time. They're tethered there to effectively Greenwich Mean Time, so they're living the same time frame as we are in London, and yet going around the Earth in 90 minutes, and then they're also working to the time zone of NASA, which is several hours behind, and then the time zone of Russia, which is several hours in front. I mean, if it's really the core of the whole book, this disruption of time. And so when it became obvious to me that that should be embedded in the structure of the book, that of course the book should be 1 day and it should be these 16 orbits and they should be the chapter titles, and that I could encode this idea of time being shredded into the structure of the book, then the whole thing just made sense. And at that point, it shrank because it was a much longer book until that point. And then once I decided it should be 1 day, it just sort of went zoop, and then everything kind of aligned. And I wrote it very quickly after that. But until I got to that point, which looking back was very obvious. I don't know how it took me quite so long to get there, but once I got to that point, it was very clear. Yeah, of course, it should be. And I love, it's a very modernist technique, isn't it, to have a book set over 1 day? And I love modernist novels, and so I'm sure there was some influence there.
And as a person, do you feel that we need to have this anchoring of the mind through time, or do you feel that we should sort of let go of the restrictions of time, of the being bound to time? How like you as a novelist, how do you feel about this?
Well, I mean, as a human, I think we can't let go of those restrictions. They're in every cell. Every cell has a clock. It is in us, and even though we know time isn't linear, and even though we know that there's this curious thing that's the fabric of space-time, and we can sort of understand it intellectually all the same, we are living in a way that does appear extremely linear and that will inexorably end with our aging and our death. This is a one-way journey. It's not, we can't choose otherwise. So we are very much on one path in life, and we might know that it's not linear, but it sure does feel linear to us. And I think in that sense, being a novelist is it's a kind of liberation from that momentarily, isn't it? Because in the novel you can do anything with time. This is something I love about novel writing, is that you can go anywhere with time. You can go backwards, you can go forwards, and you can go into the future, the past. You can speed time up and you can slow it down. You know, this idea of like narrative hydraulics, the way you kind of get time moving through the narrative and get an energy in the book by, you know, the amount of time you give to any given event in the book. You can just liberate yourself, and there are no budget constraints with a novel. You know, you can jump anywhere, and it's not like some kind of prop department has got to deal with this. You can just do whatever you like. And I think that that's something I love about writing. It's that, yes, I as a human, as we all are, I'm locked into this very kind of trammeled journey with time. We're going that way, and it's going to end in death. But in the novel, you can be free. You can do what you want to do. You can explore time in all sorts of ways. And I think I've tried to do that in all of my books, actually, in some way or another, some more than others. Like The Western Wind is told backwards over 4 days.
Can I ask you a question about Western Wind? In fact, how did that come about? When did you realize that you should write it backwards in time?
Well, weirdly, this is the only book about which I can say this. But the idea for The Western Wind came to me on a walk one day, and it came to me quite complete. I mean, not all the details, but the basic premise of it, and the key things I needed to know came to me, and it came to me clearly as a novel that needed to go backwards. So it was all just given to me. And of course, I couldn't accept that it could be that easy, so I fought against it. And I thought, I don't want to write a novel in reverse chronology. It feels perversely difficult. You know, it's hard enough writing a novel as it is. Why do it backwards? Also gimmicky. I don't want to just do something for the sake of it. You know, I always want to do things that feel necessary to the book. You know, that feel, when you've written the book, it feels like it couldn't have been told any other way, rather than you're just showing off, you know. So I really resisted it. And I tried to write it forwards in a standard chronology, and it wouldn't work. So I just decided to go for it.
It works. It really works.
It was great fun to do.
It's interesting to see how, because you know exactly how it's going to end.
Yeah.
Because it starts with the ending. So how did you manage to keep the reader, you know, interested, curious to see how it begins? Or maybe that's the answer. I'm answering my own question, probably.
It's that the kind of detective work, isn't it? I mean, it's not in any sense original to tell something backwards, and certainly not to show the ending first. I mean, you know, in so many kind of crime dramas, say, the first scene is, there's the murder, there's the thing that's happened, and then the drama is about working backwards and going back to the beginning to find out what happened. So it's really the same premise. And I also think there's something, even though it's going backwards, that the impulse for the reader is exactly the same as if it's going forwards, because you hope the question the reader has is always, what happens next? And the fact that what happens next is happening chronologically before doesn't really matter from a narrative point of view. It's still, the reader wants to know what happens next on the next page. Yeah.
And this leads me to another question about memory, because I noticed that many of your characters, not just in Orbital, I noticed it in The Wilderness and in Dear Thief. And most of the characters are ruminating about past experiences. They are like haunted about something that happened in the past, and they keep trying to go back and remember it and retelling it. And some of them maybe are misremembering the past. And there is sort of an explanation of this about the soldier who tells who is recounting a memory, and every time he tells this story, it keeps changing, it keeps getting exaggerated. And sort of the explanation for this is, and I'm quoting, because memory can make a shattered dream come true. And I found that very beautiful, that if misremembering the past makes you feel better, then that's the magic of faulty memories. And is this why, so this is the question, is this why several of your stories revolve around unreliable or fragmented memories? And how do you make sure that the spell does not break for the reader?
Yeah. I think that there's that idea that that memory can restore a shattered dream, or it can redeem us in some way to remember something in a particular way. And it can also, of course, work in the opposite direction, that we can torture ourselves with a memory that it might be wrong. We might have misremembered it or exaggerated it in order to somehow torment ourselves. So it can kind of work in both directions. And I suppose I'm just interested in how, as I think so many novelists are, because there's such a lot of parallels between fiction and memory. So I'm fascinated by how fictional memory is. There's really nothing, even if you can corroborate a memory with somebody else. My sister and I talk often, we're very close in age, and we often talk about our childhood. And it's very wonderful when she remembers something I remember, but we always remember it differently. And probably neither of our memories are correct in any way, but it becomes irrelevant whether a memory is correct in some ways. Everything about ourselves, our very selves in time, are fictional characters. The self that you were and that I was 5 minutes ago is a fictional character. It doesn't exist anymore, and it can only be accessed through memories which are by their very nature partial and unreliable. There's nothing there's usually nothing intentional about that. We just come with bias and with faulty memory. So I think that there's something in the way that we are constantly constructing ourselves through memory, constantly. And the way that a fictional text is constructed, that are so similar. And so I think that this is probably why memory plays a part in so much fiction, because they're very similar mechanisms.
There's a quotation, I think it's from Dear Thief, where she says, how do you tell a real person from a fictional person? How do you tell the difference? And it doesn't really matter.
Yes,
after all.
Yes, exactly. Because we're constructing the sense of ourselves through time by way of memory, in a way that enables us to live. It's a constant negotiation with the facts, because this is how we manage to negotiate life, by making a version of ourselves that we can live with, or by making a version of ourselves that we can't live with and that we're always fighting against. And I find that just very, very fascinating. And I think too, there's a parallel between fiction and dreams as well. I think more and more, the more I write, the more I feel like writing is a kind of lucid dreaming, and it's a similar thing, this construction of oneself through the mechanism of dreams and the subconscious. So I find that very interesting.
In fact, the astronauts and cosmonauts in Orbital, they seem to think about the past a lot, and they all seem to want to find the origin, like what happened in their childhood, which then led to them becoming astronauts. And I was wondering whether they were misremembering as well, trying to find the source of their interest, maybe because it's comforting for them, especially with Qi, who just lost her mother, and the photograph of her mother. It's comforting for her to say that it's okay that she died while I'm away, while I'm up here. So there's perhaps that.
Yeah.
Would you like to read a short excerpt from Orbital?
Yeah. I'll read just a really short bit I'll read this bit from the beginning. It's just describing their arrival on the space station and the first few days that follow. They have each at some point been shot into the sky on a kerosene bomb and then through the atmosphere in a burning capsule with the equivalent weight of 2 black bears upon them. They have each steeled their rib cages against the force until they felt the bears retreat, one after the other, and the sky becomes space, and gravity diminish, and their hair stand on end. 6 of them, in a great H of metal hanging above the earth. They turn head on heel 4 astronauts, American, Japanese, British, Italian, and 2 cosmonauts, Russian, 2 women, 4 men, 1 space station made up of 17 connecting modules, 17,500 miles an hour. They are the latest 6 of many. Nothing unusual about this anymore. Routine astronauts in Earth's backyard. Earth's fabulous and improbable backyard. Turning head on heel in the slow drift of their hurtle, head on hip, on hand, on heel, turning and turning with the days. The days rush. They will each be here for 9 months or so, 9 months of this weightless drifting, 9 months of this swollen head, 9 months of this sardine living, 9 months of this earthward gaping, then back to the patient planet below. Some alien civilization might look on and ask, what are they doing here? Why do they go nowhere but round and round? The Earth is the answer to every question. The Earth is the face of an exalted lover. They watch it sleep and wake and become lost in its habits. The Earth is a mother waiting for her children to return, full of stories and rapture and longing. Their bones a little less dense, their limbs a little thinner, eyes filled with sights that are difficult to tell.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
I think we have time for questions from the audience.
I've read Wilderness and Orbital, and I found them deeply human novels. Do you write about it because you actually feel that there's a great sensitivity with us, or there's a loss of hope, and you want to emphasize that there's good in humanity? If I'm clear about this.
I don't know. I mean, I do think, though, I do think for me, writing is a kind of practice of hope, I suppose. I find as a human, I tend more towards despair than hope, and I find that a weakness in myself, because I think that it's not good enough to despair about things, and I do believe in the goodness of people, and I see it every day, as most of us here do. And I think writing is one way of me exploring that and really attending to that, because I think when you're writing your characters, whoever they are and whatever they're doing, you are bound to feel a certain sympathy for them, and you're bound to recognize their humanity. Otherwise, you wouldn't be writing about them. They just wouldn't be interesting enough to you. So I think that there's something implicit in the practice of writing and really attending to something and spending your time with it and caring about it enough to write about it. That is a kind of practice of optimism in a way, you know. And I really wanted Orbital to be a book that is about joy, really. That was my starting point. You know, I thought I don't feel that good about the world when I look at what's happening. And this was in 2019 when I started it, and it certainly hasn't got any better since then. But I think it's possible to write something that comes from this place of from the heart and from an almost feeling of being in love. You know, it felt like writing a love story to me, and I wanted it to feel good and I wanted it to feel joyful. And I think that was for me as much as anything else. You know, it was consoling for me to do that, and it was a great healing process. And it did help me to feel more compassionately towards humans. It did. You know, I think we're in some ways doing an absolutely terrible job of our being custodians of this planet, but we are also we have also been given this planet to take care of, and God knows how you do that, you know. And we also have survival instincts to fulfill, and so many competing demands on us. And I think in many ways we strive towards kindness and we strive towards goodness. Very often fail to do that too. But I wanted to kind of attend to those things a bit. Yeah.
Thank you.
I met the book when I saw the list of Nature's best science books in 2024. And I think you must be the only Booker Prize winner who's got the Booker Prize as well as the Nature recognition. And it's not an award in itself. You've spoken a bit about the process and in the various drafts. How much did you find yourself putting a bit more science, taking more science out, working between the technical aspects and risking boring the readers versus bringing a sense of wonder, but then making it seem more a fairy tale than a grounded novel in what was happening on the space station? So these decisions must have been, it feels perfect as you read the book now, but it would be great to hear the process where you struggled with those decisions. I have a footnote so that you spoke about painterliness and making marks. When are we going to see the Folio Society edition with illustrations punctuating the different orbits?
I would love.
Or maybe that's an idea.
Yeah, I would love that. That would be great. I would definitely be up for that. I think that the question about, I think you said something about you said the word fairy tale. That's really interesting because I see Orbital as a kind of exercise in my attempt at spell binding, I guess. And I think that that's what novels do. I mean, however they do it, whether it's through plot or through their language or whatever, I think novels are a form of spell binding, and they're taking you up into their spell. And hopefully they're not breaking that spell until the the novel has finished. And I had that very much in my mind because there's not a lot going on in the book as such. There isn't a plot, there isn't a sort of central human character. I was thinking very much about, how do I keep my readers and how do I spellbind them? And I think the question about how much research to put in there and how much science and how much of the tech stuff is always it was always in service to this question of spellbinding. So of course, if you go into too much technical detail and it becomes a bit rigid and a bit textbook and a bit boring, then you're going to break the spell. But there are so many details, technical details about them being there that are themselves spellbinding. The fact that even they are, they're falling around the earth, they're not flying. There's no or very, very little gravity on the ISS, not because there's no gravity there. They're very close to the Earth. There's plenty. It's like 90% gravity, but they're falling at 17,500 miles an hour. And it's like as if they're constantly on a roller coaster. That weightlessness that you get momentarily before you fall. That's the state that they're in all the time. Those sorts of facts that are technical, but they're also part of the poetry. And you find that there are all these moments where the tech and science and the poetry dovetail. And that's what I was always looking for. How, if I include this piece of information, will it add to the spellbinding or will it break the spellbinding? And it's trial and error a lot of times. There were lots of things I put in there that didn't stay in there, that they were just too technical, or I couldn't find a way of housing them in the narrative. They just didn't work. And I had a long section about some tracking device they had to track animal migrations on the Earth, and I had much more detail about the spacewalk and the kind of the tech details of that, and it all just made the prose go flat. It wasn't right, and it's difficult sometimes because you've done the research and it's so fascinating, and you want to shoehorn it in there, but it's just not going to go. And it's about listening, I guess. Having an ear for the prose, and is it still singing? Is that hum still going through it, or has it been disrupted by this little precious, wonderful technical detail that you really don't want to leave out, but that has no place there?
One last question. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much. My voice is struggling, so my boyfriend will ask
Okay.
my question.
I hope your voice comes back soon.
She said, your writing is so beautiful, and I'm curious to hear where you draw your literary inspiration. What authors or books have shaped you or influenced you and your creative process? And the second part is, as someone who also lectures on creative writing, what are some of your favorite writing exercises for your students that you found helpful and instrumental in shaping and developing an aspiring author's writing?
Oh my gosh. Well, it's really hard to pin down what has influenced me or most kind of directed me. There are certain authors I love, that I go back to. I love the Portuguese writer José Saramago. I love Marilyn Robinson, the American writer. Virginia Woolf, I really love. Thomas Hardy. There are so many. There's poetry is something I go back to a lot too. And I would say for Orbital, it was poetry that really gave the oxygen to this book. There were a couple of poems. There was a translation, albeit I can't read the original, but there's the Osip Mandelstam poem, "And I Was Alive," which has this kind of the translation of it is it's just this incredible, like breathless, awestruck celebration of being alive in the midst of actually terrible suffering in his case. That poem really informed the writing of this book. And there's a poem by Dennis Johnson called To Enter Again, which is about astronauts coming back to the Earth after a space mission, which gave me the language for Orbital. I started writing the book, and then someone sent me that poem, and I read it, and I was like, oh, this is the language I need. This is that marriage, of poetry and science. This is, poetry is the bridge between sort of the creative and the technical, because poetry is both. It's technical and it's also very elusive. And so that poem. But music is a big influence on me as well. I think influence just comes from everywhere for me. And often in ways I'm not that aware of until it surfaces in something I've written. And so as for writing exercises, that's a really, really difficult question. There's one I like to do. I don't know if it's a good exercise or not, but I always think that first person is very easy to write badly. And a lot of people tend to write their first novels in first person because I guess it feels natural, because we all live in first person. So it feels like the natural thing to do, but it's incredibly difficult to do it well. It's a really, really artificial way of writing. If you say in a narrative, I hear someone knock on the door, I stand up, I walk to the door. This isn't how we think when we're going about our days. I don't think, I didn't walk on the stage and think, I walk on the stage, I sit down. So it's a very weird voice to write in. So I often try to, with that, I try to get students to write a first person passage, but without using any first person pronouns at all. No I, me, my, and just to see what happens. And when you strip away that pronoun, then it often starts to sound a bit more like the way we live. There's this kind of continually unfolding experience of being in the first person, which is not narrating being in the first person, it is being it. So that's one off the top of my head that I can think of. You're welcome.
Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you.
This conversation, I'm sure we'll be rereading your novels with your words in mind. So thank you, and thank you for the audience for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. And can I just say that after 2 years of publicizing Orbital, because it came out in November 23, but particularly this last year since the Booker, I have done so many events, countless, and this is my last one. So thank you for being here.